Hello. Oh, I'm dark, huh? Oh, there I am. Hi. How's everybody? Welcome to Frankenstein Tea. It is Sunday, June 14th. I am here live, coming at you live from my home on High Street on Block Island with a short story for adult listeners, an afternoon check-in. Make sure everybody's doing okay, hanging in there, making their way through whatever phase of COVID you're in or COVID time period, right? Let's hope you're not in COVID. Hi, Dad. But are you in reopening? Are you shelter in place still? Are you quarantining yourself? Are you attempting to have some social activities? Are you seeing family? What's going on and how's it going? That's the check-in today. What's going on and how's it going? How's it going for me today? Let's see. I got caught up in some chores. I wanted to be social. I'm hoping to be a little social later after this. It's a little chilly. I went and got a sweatshirt. But it's sunny and warm when you're in the sunny and warm sun. Of course, that sounds kooky, but you know how much sense that makes. And it's Sunday. It was a quiet morning on Block Island. Then we had a little activity, and I suspect it'll be quiet maybe tonight. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe we're just in summer now. Maybe it's just busy. Not sure. Lots of not sure still in this world, right? Lots of still unsure what we're doing next. Well, I know what I'm doing next. I'm going to read you a short story. I'm going to read, it's Sunday, reading from home, reading from my son's textbook, 40 short stories, a portable anthology, the 5th edition, edited by Beverly Lawn. I'm having a little bit of water. What are you having? Something nice? Sitting back and enjoying something nice? So I know I'm a little dark, but I don't think I'm going to stand up. I can see the writing, and so I think I'm just going to go without the light, just natural light here. And yeah, I think we're go. So today's story is Inbound by Edith Perlman. On the subway, Sophie recited the list of stations like a poem. Then she read the names from the bottom up. Saying something backward made it easier to remember, sealed it in. When the got off at the Harvard Square station, she frowned at a platform sign. Outbound? She asked her mother. Joanna was bending over Lily's stroller, adjusting the child's harness. So Ken answered, Outbound, in this case, means away from the center of the city, he said. There are 2 sets of tracks. Coextensive. He paused. Coextensive? Sophie had learned to read at 3. Her vocabulary at 7 was prodigious. Still, they outbound, and the other carries them inbound, Sophie said. Then, when we go back to the hotel, we'll go inbound. But why aren't the inbound tracks next to these ones? Yesterday, under the aquarium, Ken inhaled deeply. For a moment, Sophie regretted getting him started. This Harvard Square station used to be the terminus, he told her, the last stop. When the engineers enlarged the system, they ran up against the sewers, so they had to separate inbound and outbound vertically. He had invented this explanation, or maybe he'd heard it somewhere. Inbound is 1 level below us. That much he was sure of. The family walked down a shallow ramp to the concourse. Sophie led the way. Her straight blonde hair half covered the multicolored hump of her new backpack, a birthday gift from her parents. During their early married travels, Ken and Joanna had worn explorers' russacks to out-of-the-way places. After Sophie was born, they traveled only to France, always with their little girl. This venture from the northern plains across half the country was the first family excursion since Lily's birth 2 years ago. An excursion is a loop, Joanna had lightly explained to Sophie. We start from home, we end up at home. Ken, pushing the heavy stroller and its calm passenger, kept pace with Sophie. Joanna was at his heels, swinging the diaper bag and her scuffed brown pocketbook. On the concourse, Sophie paused. The stairs are at the left, Ken said. Sophie started toward them, her parents like friendly bears behind her. Other people on the way out pushed through unresisting turnstiles, but because of the large stroller, Ken and Joanna and Sophie and Lily had to use the gate near the token vendor's booth. The stairway to the street was broad enough to climb together. Ken and Joanna lifted the stroller between them. All four, blinking, reached the white light of Harvard Square at the same time. Lily, startled and amused by the hawkers, made her familiar gurgle. Mama, she said to Ken. Dada, darling, he returned. Dada. Sophie, 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 said Sophie, dancing in front of the stroller. Mama, Lily said. She was not yet able to say her sister's name, though sometimes on the living room floor, when Sophie was helping her pick up a toy, Lily would raise her odd eyes and gaze at the older girl with brief interest. She had Down syndrome. At 2, she was small, fair, and unfretful, though Ken and Joanna knew there was little about Downs that they did not know now, that the condition was no guarantee of placidity. Lily was just beginning to crawl, and her muscle tone was improving. The doctor was pleased. In the padded stroller, she could sit more or less erect. Lily clarifies life, Sophie had heard her father say to one of his friends. Sophie didn't agree. Clarity you could get by putting on glasses, or you could skim foam off warm butter. Her mother had shown her how, leaving a thin yellow liquid that couldn't even hold crackers together. Lily didn't clarify. She softened things and made them sticky. Sophie and each parent had been separate individuals before Lily came. Now all four melted together like gumdrops left on a windowsill. Even today, walking through the gates of the university that looked like the college where her parents taught, but redder, older, heavier, leaving behind shoppers in Harvard Square, feeling a thudding below their feet as another subway hurtled outbound or inbound, selecting one path within a web of walks in a yard surrounded by buildings. Even today, on this uncrowded campus, they moved as a cluster. Massachusetts Hall, Ken pointed out, the oldest building in the university. That's the statue of John Harvard over there. And dormitories new since our time. Would you like to live here someday, Sophie? I don't know. Clumped around the stroller, they entered another quadrangle. There was a church on one side, and, on the opposite side, a stone staircase as wide as 3 buildings. The stairs rose toward a colonnade. That's the 5th biggest library in the world, her father told her. What's the 6th? He smiled. The Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. You were there. Paris? Sophie recalled stained glass. They had to climb narrow, winding stairs to reach a second floor. Her mother, soon to give birth, had breathed hard. Blue light from the windows poured upon them, upon her tall, thin father, her tall, bulging mother, her invisible sister, herself. She recalled the metro, too, as smelly as day camp. The bibliothèque? Her father said again. Remember? No. Ken, said Joanna. They drifted toward the 5th biggest library. Joanna and Ken carried the stroller up the stone stairs. Sophie, in a spasm of impatience, ran to the top, ran down, flew up again. She hid behind a pillar. They didn't notice. She welcomed them at the entrance. Inside, an old man sat at a desk inspecting backpacks. The family crossed a marble hallway and climbed marble stairs that ended in a nave of computer terminals. At last, Lily began to whimper. They pushed the stroller into an area of card catalogs. Joanna picked Lily up. "We'll go into a big reading room," she crooned into a lobeless ear. "We'll look out a window." Sophie watched them walk away, her mother so narrow in the familiar black coat. "Where are the books?" she asked her father. "My little scholar," he said, and took her hand. The entrance to the cave of books was just a door. An ordinary freckled boy who looked like her high school cousin casually guarded the way. Her father fished in every pocket for the card that would admit them. Finally, he found it. "Children," began the boy. 10 minutes, Ken promised. Sophie had heard this tone reassuring a woman who had slipped on the ice in front of their house. Her father had used it also to soothe their cat when she was dying of cancer. "We're in town from Minnesota. I want her to see this treasure. 5 minutes." The boy shrugged. Sophie followed her father through the door. Her heart, already low, dropped farther, as when some playground kid shoved her. Upright books were jammed shoulder to shoulder within high metal cases, no room to breathe. Book after book, shelf above shelf, case following case, with only narrow aisles between. Too many books. Too many even if the print were large. "This was floor 4 East," said painted letters on the wall. They walked up and down the aisles until they reached the end of 4 East. Then they turned. 4 East became 4 South. Behind a grill stood an aisle of little offices, all with their doors closed. Sophie wondered what her mother was doing. Section 4 West came next. It was just like 4 East. Books, books, books. A tiny elevator hunched among them. "Where does that go?" she whispered. "Up to 5 and 6, he whispered back. "Down to 3 and 2 and 1 and A and B. Are the 5 minutes up?" "And C and D." This time it was Sophie who led the way, easier than she'd anticipated. You just hugged the perimeter. There was even an exit sign. The freckled boy outside nodded at them. Her mother waited next to the stroller. Lily was sitting in it again, sucking on a bottle. Sophie kissed Lily 7 times. Was she impressed? She heard her mother ask. "Awed," her father said. She gave Lily a ride, moving among card drawers on wooden legs. Ken and Joanna watched their children appear and disappear. "Those silent stacks," he said. "The elevator where I first kissed you. I'd forgotten it." He kissed her again, lightly, on the elegant cheekbone that neither girl had inherited. She kept her face raised as if seeking sunlight. Then, "Let's try the museum," she said. "Sophie will like the Renoirs," Ken agreed. But at the museum, Sophie found the seated bather spacey. Her father directed her gaze toward a painting of ballerinas haphazardly practicing. What was the point of that? Only one work caught her interest. Substantial angels with dense, overflapping feathers and bare feet reflected in the sand. "So you like Burne-Jones," he mumbled. They were soon back on the street again, talking about lunch. Ken and Joanna decided on a favorite restaurant, hoping it still existed. They headed in its direction on a sidewalk next to the backs of buildings. "The library's rear door," Ken said, pointing. Sophie averted her gaze. They crossed the street at the traffic light. That is, 3 of them did. Sophie, her head still awkwardly turned, got caught on the curb as the light flashed, "Don't walk." Her parents lumbered away. Other people bore down upon her, blocking her view. By the time the crowd rushed past, the cars on the street had begun to roll again, and she was forced to stand still. That was all right. Standing still was what she was supposed to do when she became separated from a parent. If both of us run around, you see, the chances are that we'll never be in the same place at the same time, her mother had explained. Like atoms, Sophie said. I guess so, but if one of us stays put, the moving one will eventually cross the still one's path. It made sense. Sophie had imagined that in such an event, she would turn cool, a lizard under a leaf. Instead, she turned hot, even feverish. She sang, "Go tell Aunt Rhody," under her breath. The sign changed to walk. She sang Rhody backward. Her mother would soon cross her path, but her mother would not leave the stroller. The sign changed back to "Don't walk." Her father then, he would stride across the street. 2 leaps would do it. He would scoop her up. He would put her on his shoulder, though she was much too big for such a perch. She would ride there for blocks and blocks. The restaurant would have a peaked roof and a lot of panes in the windows. They always chose restaurants like that. Joanna had maneuvered the stroller rightward, had taken a step or two, had turned back for Sophie, not seen her, looked right twice, and then left, down a pedestrian walkway, and spotted amid a crowd of kids around a mime the fair hair and multicolored backpack of her daughter. Her heart bobbled like a balloon. "Where's Sophie?" Ken said at her shoulder. She pointed confidently and pushed the stroller close to the slanted window of a bakery. She'd lift Lily out, and all 3 would have a good view of the mime. He was deftly climbing in a visible ladder. And of the delighted children, particularly Sophie in her new backpack and her old turquoise jacket, only that kid's jacket was green, and she was taller than Sophie, and her hair was yellower than Sophie's, much yellower. Only an unnatural parent could mistake that common candle flame for her daughter's pale incandescence. Sophie, telling herself to stand still, was jostled from behind. She turned to object, but the jostler had disappeared. The sign changed to walk. Without forethought, though not unwillingly, she leaped into the street. Sweaty, gasping, she fetched up on the opposite curb. She did not see her family. She saw strollers here and there, but none of them were Lily's. They were the fold-up kind for regular kids. She saw a wheelchair. That wasn't relevant. She scolded herself, brushing her nose with the back of her hand. Lily would walk someday. A jester with a painted face, white face, seemed to wave. She ignored him. She drifted toward the center of the square. Earlier, she had noticed a newsstand. A kiosk, her father had said. The newsstand turned out to be a bright little house of magazines and newspapers and maps. A man wearing earmuffs sat at a cash register. The place shook slightly every few minutes. The subway was underneath. There, Sophie waited, alone and unknown and free. By now, her parents would have retraced their steps. They had already crossed her empty path. She felt most comfortable near the far wall. Foreign newspapers overlapped one another. There were French papers. She recognized Le Monde from the trip to Paris. The World, her father, if he were here, would request the translation. There were newspapers from other parts of Europe too. She could tell that their words were Spanish or Italian, though she did not know the meanings. In some papers, even the alphabets were mysterious. Letters curved like Aladdin's lamp or had dots and dashes underneath them like a second code. Characters she had seen in Chinese restaurants stood straight up, little houses, each with a family of its own. Lily might learn to read, her mother had said. Not soon. But someday, until that day, all pages would look like these, confusing her, making her feel more left out. Still, in a few years' time, she would be walking. She would stand close to Sophie, maybe too close. What does it mean? She would whisper. What does it mean? She would whine and pull at Sophie's sleeve. The man with the earmuffs gave Sophie an inquisitive look. She turned to study a newspaper. Each word was many letters long, and each letter was a combination of thick and thin lines. She knew all at once that this was German. Her father played Bach on his harpsichord from a facsimile of an old manuscript. The title and the directions were in German. If Sophie stayed in this pretty little house for the rest of her life, she could probably learn one or two of the languages whose alphabet was familiar. Here was how she would do it. She would read the English papers thoroughly, and then, knowing the news by heart, she would figure out the words partners in the other papers. Joanna and Ken were behaving sensibly. Joanna was waiting near the mime, who was now walking an imaginary tightrope. He stopped, alarm on his painted face. He was pretending to lose his balance. His stiffened body canted slowly sideways in discreet jerks, like a minute hand, until at 10 past the hour he collapsed into himself and in a wink became a man hanging from a tightrope. Left arm upward and unnaturally long, right one waving desperately, legs splayed. Ken had gone looking for Sophie. He would follow their route backward to the museum, into the museum, from the Burne-Jones camp counselor angels to the Degas and the Renoir. He would return to the library if necessary. Joanna imagined his tense interrogation of the man who inspected backpacks. The mime was collecting a thicker crowd. She had to crane her head to watch him. Sophie would enjoy this outdoor show once Ken found her, if she had not been snatched into a car, if she were not to end her life as a photograph on a milk carton. Joanna must not think that way. Not. She must imagine normal outcomes, like normal mothers, like mothers of normal children. The girl has wandered off, ruining our day because of some rush of curiosity. Hyperintuitive, they call her. I call her inconsiderate. Doesn't she know enough to make things easier, not harder? Don't we have it hard enough already with little misfit here? Oh, my sweet Lily, my sweet Sophie, my darling daughters. And so I'll gaze at Lily, dozing, and think of Sophie when she was an infant and slept on her side in her crib with arms extended forward and legs too. She looked like a bison on a cave. I remember. She probably remembers, she with the genius IQ who can sing songs backward. Ken loves to show off her memory and her queer talents, his prize onion. The mime's pedaling to safety. He's earned that applause. Haven't I got coins for his hat? But I can't leave the stroller. We can't leave each other, any of us. Of course, Sophie will remember to stand still as soon as she realizes she's lost. Where would she go? She doesn't know this town. She's seen only the museum. She didn't like it. And the library. She hated it. Ken was hurt. She liked the subway. All kids like the underground. Sewers, buried treasures, zombies. All kids like trains. They want to be headed somewhere. Inbound, outbound. Ken's face was putty. The library? She needlessly asked. No, he panted. Come, Joanna said. I know where she'll go. Sophie, wriggling one arm out of the backpack, decided to start with the French newspapers. She was to study French next year anyway, with the rest of the special class. But she was pretty sure that she wouldn't soar with the new subject. She was tied to her first language, hers and Lily's. Still, she'd learn the rules. She'd listen and sometimes talk. Now staring at Le Monde, pretending that the man with earmuffs had gone home, she let her eyes cross slightly, the way she wasn't supposed to, and she melted into the spaces between the paragraphs until she entered a room beyond the newsprint, a paneled room lit by candles, walled in leather volumes, the way she had wanted the fifth biggest library to look. Though more books had been written than she could ever read, she had realized that as soon as she saw Section 4 East, she would manage to read a whole lot of them in golden dens like the one she was seeing. She would read as many as her parents had read. She would grow as large as her parents had grown. Like them, she would study and get married and laugh and drink wine and hug people. Steadied by this vision, she let herself look further. Her life would be lived in the world, not in this paper house. She foresaw that. She foresaw also that as she became strong, her parents would dare to weaken. They too might tug at her clothing, not meaning to annoy. Lily would never leave her. She will always be different, darling, her mother had said. At the time, Sophie had thought that her mother meant we will always be different. Now she added a new gloss. I will always be different. She felt her cheek tingle as if it had been licked by the sad, dry tongue of a cat. At full growth, Lily's head would be almost level with Sophie's shoulder. Lily would learn some things. Mostly she would learn Sophie. They would know each other forward and backward. They would run side by side like subway tracks, inbound, outbound, coextensive. She had to return to her family now. She had to complete the excursion. She shoved her free arm into the strap and settled the backpack on her shoulders. She walked past the man in earmuffs without saying goodbye. Ken and Joanna bumped the stroller down the subway stairs. Ordinarily, they would have joined the line at the token vendor's booth to be admitted through his gate. Instead, Joanna inserted a token and hurried through the turnstile. Ken handed her their little girl across the device. He pressed his own token into the slot and turned around and lifted the stroller above his head and burst through the stile, outstocks first. Burst through the stile, buttocks first. They put Lily back into the stroller and rushed toward the ramps. Outbound? Said Ken. She knows better. On the ramp, they had to arc around an old woman who had paused mid-journey with her trash bag on her left and her collapsible cart on her right. That's okay, she called. The inbound train had just left. The platform held 5 people who had missed it. 3 students, 1 bearded man, and a tall black woman. An islander, Joanna could tell. Her regality proclaimed her origins. That magazine under her arm was probably in French. Sophie wasn't far behind them. She had found the subway entrance as soon as she left the little house. While her father was bearing the empty stroller backward through the turnstile, she was beginning her descent from the street. While her mother was choosing inbound, Sophie was thinking about joining the line of token buyers, of promising to pay later. She decided not to risk conversation with the man in the booth. By the time her parents reached the inbound platform, she was slipping underneath the turnstile. She started down the ramp. She saw them before she reached the bottom. Her mother sat on a bench holding Lily in her lap. Her father, standing, bent over them both. They looked like everyday people, but Sophie wasn't fooled. Her mother's knees were knocked together under her coat, and her feet were far apart, their ankles bent inward so wearily that the ankle bones almost touched the floor. Without seeing her father's face, she knew he was close to tears. An old woman with a cart leaned against the wall. As Sophie appeared, the woman said, "Now your reunion," in a conversational tone, though rather loud. Ken turned and unbent, a basketball replay in slow motion. Joanna took relief like an injection. Pain was killed and feeling as well. She saw that the child had undergone some unsettling experience, but Joanna had no sympathy to offer now. Perhaps this once Sophie would be given the blessing of forgetfulness. And indeed, Sophie moved forward with a light tread, as if she had not just witnessed the future unrolling. Lily attended slackly, but then she raised her mittened hand. Fee! That was Edith Perlman. Inbound. That was written in 1996. When I found this story today, I looked in the back of this great book and found out that Edith Perlman had been born in Providence, Rhode Island. She doesn't grow up there, though. She was born there. Born in Providence, Rhode Island, and graduated from Radcliffe College. Perlman is a fiction and nonfiction writer living in Brookline, Massachusetts. Maybe she did grow up in Providence for a bit. I'm having a sip. That was Frankenstein Tea for today, Sunday, June 14th. I'll see you tomorrow, Monday, right here, 3 o'clock, live with another short story for our adult listeners. Have a great afternoon. Enjoy it. Everybody stay well. Take care of themselves. Do what you need to do. Take a nap. Take a rest. Do some chores or walk away from them. However your Sunday ends up, I hope it's A-okay. Thanks again for coming.